The desert wind howled like a wounded beast, carrying whispers of a name no one dared to speak. Beneath the blood-red moon, a circle of shadowed figures gathered around a flickering fire, their faces half hidden by the brims of their hats. At the center stood a young woman, her wrists bound, her breath shallow with fear. The knife in the leader's hand glinted as he pressed its blade into her palm, drawing a thin line of crimson. "Blood binds you now," he growled, his voice rough as gravel. "Break this oath, and the desert itself will hunt you down." Her name was Elena, though they called her Ghost after the night her family was taken. She had been just a girl then, watching from the shadows as the outlaws rode in like demons, their laughter sharp as gunfire. They left her with nothing but a name carved into her skin, a mark of ownership. Now, years later, she stood before them again, not as a victim, but as a weapon. The clan had shaped her into something hard, something unbreakable, or so they thought. The firelight danced across the scar on her wrist, the one they'd given her the night she swore her life to them. "By blood and dust, I bind myself," she had repeated, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. But tonight, something was different. Tonight the wind carried more than just dust. It carried a warning. The desert had eyes, and it was watching. A rider approached, his silhouette dark against the horizon. The leader's grip on her arm tightened. "They say the desert whispers names," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. "Yours is the one it won't stop saying." Elena lifted her chin, her pulse roaring in her ears. She had spent years playing their game, bending to their will. But games could be won. And tonight, she was done losing. The knife pressed deeper. The circle closed in. And somewhere beyond the firelight, the desert sighed her name. If you love stories where the past refuses to stay buried, and every choice could be your last, hit like and subscribe to Saddle and Secrets. The desert's secrets are just beginning. The knife had barely left her skin when the storm hit. It came without warning. A wall of sand and fury, swallowing the fire, the men, the very air Elena had been forced to breathe. The outlaws scattered like cockroaches, their curses lost in the wind's howl. For a heartbeat, there was only chaos. Then a hand, rough, calloused, closed around her wrist and yanked her backward into the belly of the storm. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She ran. The man dragging her through the darkness was a stranger, his face wrapped in a bandana stained with dust and something darker. Blood, maybe. His grip was iron, his silence absolute. Elena's bare feet burned against the scorching sand, but she didn't slow. She couldn't. Behind them, the shouts of the clan cut through the storm like blade through flesh. "Find her! She breaks the oath! She dies!" The words were a brand, searing into her skull. She had seen what happened to those who betrayed the clan. She had helped make it happen. A gunshot cracked the night. Sand exploded at their feet. The stranger cursed, shoving her behind a jagged rock formation. His eyes, pale, almost colorless in the dim light, locked onto hers. "You're the one they call Ghost," he said, voice low, urgent. It wasn't a question. Elena's throat tightened. "They call me a lot of things." Another shot. Closer this time. The stranger pressed a finger to his lips, then jerked his chin toward a narrow crevice in the rocks. "Move. Now." She didn't hesitate. The passage was tight, the wall scraping her shoulders as she crawled, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The storm raged above them, but here, in this crack in the earth, there was only the sound of her own heartbeat and the stranger's boots scuffing against stone. Then suddenly, the world opened up. A cavern, hidden from the wind, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and old smoke. A horse, black as sin, its eyes rolling white, stood tethered to a stalagmite. The stranger moved to it, his movements quick, efficient. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they find this place." Elena's hands shook as she wiped sand from her face. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't look at her. "Because I've seen what they do to runners." His fingers worked at the saddle, pulling free a canteen and a rolled-up bundle of cloth. He tossed it to her. "Put that on. Cover your hair. Your face." She unfolded it, a man's shirt, worn thin, the sleeves too long. She hesitated. "They'll know it's you." "They already know." His voice was grim. "They've known since you first thought about running." A chill slithered down her spine. The clan had eyes everywhere, whispers in the saloons, shadows in the alleys. But this was different. This was her. "How long have you been watching me?" The stranger finally turned, and the firelight from his lantern cast his face in sharp relief. A scar cut through his eyebrow, old, but deep. His jaw was set, his mouth a flat line. "Long enough to know you didn't have a choice, and long enough to know you're not like them." Elena's fingers clenched around the fabric. She had killed for the clan, stole, lied. She had done things that stained her soul darker than the desert night. "You don't know what I've done. I know what they made you do." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "And I know you're still here. That's enough." Outside, the storm howled. Somewhere in the dark, a horse screamed. A sound cut brutally short. The clan was close. The stranger grabbed her arm again, his touch urgent. "We ride now, or we don't ride at all." She nodded. The black horse was fast, a demon in the night, its hooves barely touching the ground as they burst from the cavern. The wind tore at Elena's hair, her clothes, her skin. Behind them, torches flickered in the distance, too many to count. The clan wasn't just chasing her, they were hunting her. The stranger leaned low over the horse's neck, his body a shield between her and the bullets that whined past them like angry hornets. "Hold on," he shouted. But Elena was already clinging to him, her arms locked around his waist, her face pressed against the rough leather of his coat. She could feel the tension in his muscles, the way his breath hitched every time a shot came too close. He wasn't just risking his life for her. He was giving it. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm broke. The horse stumbled to a stop at the edge of a dry riverbed, its sides heaving. The stranger slid off first, then reached up to pull Elena down. Her legs nearly gave out beneath her. The silence was deafening after the roar of the wind, the thunder of hooves. She looked back. No torches, no shouts, just the endless watching dark. "They'll keep coming," she whispered. The stranger wiped blood from his lip. She hadn't even seen him get hit. "Yeah, but not tonight." Elena's hands trembled as she touched the scar on her wrist. The clan's mark, their curse. They'll never stop. For the first time, something like a smile touched his mouth. It wasn't kind. It wasn't reassuring. It was the smile of a man who had already decided to burn the world down and was just waiting for the match to strike. "Then we make sure they regret it." The ghost town rose from the desert like a corpse half buried in the sand. Its name had been scratched off every signpost years ago, but the whispers called it Las Lágrimas, the tears. A place where the wind carried voices that didn't belong to the living, where the walls of the abandoned saloon still echoed with the last notes of a piano played by a man long dead. The stranger led Elena through the skeletal remains of the main street, his hand never leaving the grip of his revolver. The horse's hooves kicked up dust that swirled in the moonlight, settling like a shroud over the broken storefronts and sagging porches. "We don't stay long," he muttered, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Just long enough to get our bearings." Elena's skin prickled. The town wasn't empty. She felt it before she saw it, the weight of eyes on her back, the way the shadows seemed to lean in a little too close. The windows of the old hotel were dark, but something moved behind the cracked glass. A face? A trick of the light? She couldn't tell. The stranger noticed her hesitation and followed her gaze. His jaw tightened. They're always watching in places like this. Who's they? People who don't like strangers. People who remember things they shouldn't. He jerked his chin toward a crooked building at the end of the street, its sign hanging by a single rusted chain. There, the old livery. We'll hole up until dawn. Elena didn't argue. The desert had a way of making you understand when you are out of options. The livery stank of mildew and old hay, the air thick with the scent of something long rotted. The stranger barred the door behind them, then struck a match, the flare of light revealing a space that had once been home to horses and men, but now looked like it hadn't seen life in decades. A broken wagon wheel leaned against the wall. A saddle, its leather cracked with age, lay abandoned in the corner. And in the center of the room, a circle of blackened stones, where someone had once built a fire. Elena's breath hitched. Scratched into the dirt floor, half hidden by the dust, were words. The desert remembers. The stranger saw it too. His fingers twitched toward his gun. Don't touch it. You think it's a trap. I think nothing in this town is what it seems. He crouched, examining the marks. This wasn't written today, or yesterday, but it wasn't old when it was made either. His voice dropped. Someone wanted to leave a warning. A floorboard creaked above them. Elena's head snapped up. The livery had a loft, a narrow, rickety platform where hay had once been stored. Now, it was just another layer of shadows. But the shadows moved. A slow, deliberate shift, like something breathing. The stranger stood in one fluid motion, his revolver suddenly in his hand. Show yourself. Silence. Then, a whisper. It slithered down from the rafters, a voice so dry it might have been the wind itself. You shouldn't have come here, cowboy. The stranger didn't lower his gun. We didn't have a choice. A laugh, brittle as old bones. There's always a choice. You just don't like the consequences. A figure detached itself from the dark. A man, or what was left of one. His skin was the color of parchment. His hair white as bleached bone. His eyes, when they caught the flicker of the match, were black, empty. She's the one they're looking for, isn't she? The ghost. Elena's blood turned to ice. The old man's gaze locked onto her wrist. The scar, the mark of the oath. They'll find you here. They always do. He descended the ladder with a slowness that made her skin crawl, each step kicking up dust that never seemed to settle. The desert whispers names, and yours, girl, is the one it won't stop saying. The stranger stepped between them, his body a barrier. We're not staying. We just need supplies. Food, water, a fresh horse if you've got one. The old man's lips peeled back in something that wasn't quite a smile. You think that'll save you? He reached into the folds of his coat and tossed something at Elena's feet. A pouch, small and heavy. It landed with a dull chime of metal. Take it. Silver bullets. Won't stop them forever, but it'll slow them down. Elena didn't move. What are they? Not what? Who? The old man's voice dropped to a rasp. The men hunting you ain't just men. Not anymore. They made a deal with this land a long time ago. Blood for power. And they don't let their property walk away. The stranger's finger tightened on the trigger. You're saying they're cursed? The old man let out a sound that might have been a laugh. Call it what you want. But you don't break an oath to them and live to tell about it. The desert always collects its due. Elena's fingers curled into fists. She had seen the things the clan could do, how they moved like shadows, how their bullets never missed, how they seemed to know things they shouldn't. But this was something else. This was the kind of terror that lived in campfire stories, the kind that made men cross themselves and spit over their shoulders. The old man's gaze bored into her. You feel it, don't you? The way the ground hums beneath your feet, the way the air tastes like copper. He leaned in, his breath smelling of dust and something older. Something wrong. That's them. Calling you home. The stranger grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her back. "We're done here." The old man didn't try to stop them. He just stood there, watching, as they turned toward the door. "Run all you want, ghost," he called after them. But the desert always remembers. They burst back into the street, the night air a slap in the face after the stifling darkness of the livery. The town was still. Too still. No wind, no animals, not even the distant howl of a coyote. Just the weight of something waiting. "We can't stay," the stranger growled, dragging her toward the far end of town where the horses were tethered. "We ride until we hit the river, then we—" A gunshot cracked the night. The stranger staggered, his grip on her arm slipping. Elena whirled just in time to see him drop to one knee, blood blooming dark across his shoulder. She screamed his name. She didn't even know his name, but he was already shoving her toward the horses. "Go! Now!" She didn't think. She moved. Another shot. The horse beside her screamed, collapsing in a heap of thrashing limbs. Elena's hands fumbled with the reins, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stranger fired blindly into the dark, his curses sharp with pain. "They're here! Ride, damn you!" She swung onto the saddle, kicking the horse into motion just as the first figures emerged from the shadows. Tall, too tall, their faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats, their coats flapping like crows' wings. The clan. But not as she remembered them. Their eyes gleamed in the dark, unnatural, hungry, and they were smiling. The desert whispered her name, and this time it wasn't just the wind. The pain hit like a blade to the ribs, sharp and sudden, as Elena's horse lunged into the darkness. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move. The clan's laughter echoed behind her, a sound that slithered under her skin and coiled around her bones. It wasn't human. It never had been. Her fingers clenched the reins so hard, her knuckles bleached white. The horse's flanks were lathered with sweat, its breath coming in ragged bursts. She risked a glance back. The stranger was gone. Swallowed by the night, by the things that wore the faces of men but moved like smoke. Her chest burned. She had left him. She had run. A memory struck her like a fist. She was 12 again, crouched in the dirt outside her family's burning home. Her mother's screams still ringing in her ears. The clan had come at dusk, their silhouettes cutting through the smoke, their voices low and amused as they dragged her father into the street. "You always pay your debts," one of them had said, pressing a knife into her palm. "Blood or coin, your choice, girl." She had watched, frozen, as her father's throat opened under the blade. Watched as her mother was pulled into the flames. Watched as the leader, his name was Elias, she would never forget, turned to her with a smile and said, "Now you're one of us." The scar on her wrist throbbed. She had spent years believing she had no choice, that the oath was unbreakable, that the desert owned her. But tonight, for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong. If the real prison wasn't the clan, but the fear she had let them plant inside her. The horse stumbled. Elena jerked the reins, her pulse roaring in her ears. They were nearing the river. The stranger had said to follow it east, toward the mountains, but the night was too thick, the land too unfamiliar. She slowed the horse, squinting into the dark. There, something glinted in the moonlight. Water. Or, a hand shot out of the darkness and grabbed her ankle. Elena screamed, kicking wildly. The horse reared, its hooves flashing. The grip vanished as quickly as it had come, but the damage was done. The horse bolted, throwing her sideways. She hit the ground hard, the air knocked from her lungs. Gasping, she rolled onto her hands and knees, her vision swimming. The river was closer than she thought, its surface black and still, reflecting nothing. And then she saw them. Figures stood along the bank, motionless. Too many to count. Their faces were hidden, but she didn't need to see them to know who they were. The clan. Always the clan. One of them stepped forward, his boots crunching on the gravel. You should have stayed, Ghost, Elias said, his voice like oil sliding over her skin. We could have made it easy for you. Elena's hand flew to the pouch in her pocket. The silver bullets. Useless. She was outnumbered, outgunned, out of time. But as she looked up at him, something inside her snapped. The fear was still there. But beneath it, something else. Something angry. You didn't make it easy, she spat, her voice raw. You made it hell. Elias tilted his head, amused. And yet here you are, still breathing, still running. He crouched in front of her, close enough that she could see the scars around his neck, the way his pupils swallowed the light. You think you're the first to try? The desert always takes what's ours. Elena's fingers curled into the dirt. She could feel it, the hum beneath her palms, the way the ground seemed to breathe. The old man's words echoed in her skull. The desert remembers. But if it remembered, then it knew her too. It knew the girl who had watched her family die, the woman who had killed for men who called her property, the part of her that had always wanted to scream. She looked up at Elias and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then let it take me, she said, her voice steady. But I'm not going back. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Elias laughed, low and dangerous. Bold words for a girl with no gun. He reached for her, and the ground moved. A crack split the earth between them, wide and sudden, as if the desert itself had flinched. Elias stumbled back, his laughter dying in his throat. The other figures hissed, their forms flickering like candle flames. Elena's breath came fast. She hadn't done that. She couldn't have. But the scar on her wrist burned, hot as a brand. What the hell are you? Elias snarled. Elena didn't know, but for the first time she wanted to find out. The wind howled, and the desert whispered her name. This time she answered. She surged to her feet and ran, not away, but toward the river, toward the thing inside her that had just woken up. Behind her, Elias roared, but his voice was drowned out by the sudden rush of water, the groan of the earth shifting beneath her boots. She didn't look back. She didn't need to. The desert was watching, and for the first time, it wasn't calling her back. It was calling her home. The riverbank was slick with mud and something darker, something that glistened under the moonlight like spilled oil. Elena's boots sank into it as she stumbled forward, her breath burning in her throat. The clan's shouts had faded, swallowed by the sudden unnatural silence that pressed down on the desert like a shroud. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving. The scar on her wrist pulsed, a slow, insistent throb that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. And then she saw him. A man stood at the water's edge, his back to her, his shoulders tense beneath a duster coat that had seen too many storms. For a heartbeat, she thought it was the stranger, the one who had pulled her from the clan's grasp, the one whose name she still didn't know. But this man was taller, his stance different, familiar, in a way that made her stomach twist. You're a long way from home, Ghost. The voice sent a jolt through her. She knew it. She hated it. Elena spun, her fingers flying to the knife at her belt. Cade! He turned slowly, the river water lapping at his boots. His face was all sharp angles and shadows, his dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. The last time she'd seen him, he'd been standing over a man she'd just killed, his expression unreadable as he wiped his own blade clean. Miss me? Like a bullet wound, she snapped. Cade had been Elias's right hand once, a killer, a liar. The man who'd taught her how to hold a gun without flinching. The man who'd walked away without a word 3 years ago, leaving her to rot in the clan's grip. What the hell are you doing here? He smirked, but it didn't reach his eyes. Same as you, I reckon. Running from devils. His gaze flicked to her wrist, to the scar that marked her as the clan's property. Though yours seemed to be catching up faster than mine. Elena's grip tightened on the knife. You don't get to act like you care. Never said I did. He stepped closer, and she caught the scent of gunpowder and old leather. But I do know what happens when you break an oath to Elias. And I know you didn't come this far just to die in the mud. She wanted to hit him. She wanted to scream. But the river was rising, the water dark and hungry, and the desert's hum was louder now, a low, insistent vibration in her bones. What's happening to me? The words slipped out before she could stop them. Cade's expression darkened. You really don't know. Know what? Her voice cracked. 1 minute I'm running, the next the ground splits open, and the river answers when you call. He cut her off, his voice low. Yeah, I've seen it before. Elena's breath hitched. What is it? A curse, a gift. Depends on who you ask. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn pouch, the same kind the old man in the ghost town had given her. You're marked, ghost, not just by the clan, by this land. And it don't let go easy. She stared at the pouch, then at him. You're one of them. Was. His jaw tightened. Then I got smart. Then I ran. And now? Now I'm the only reason you're still breathing. He tossed the pouch to her. She caught it, her fingers brushing against something cold and smooth inside. A stone. No, a tooth. Silver won't stop them, but that might buy you time. Elena's stomach twisted. What is it? A piece of the thing that made the oath in the first place. Cade's voice dropped. Elias didn't just swear you to him, Ghost. He swore you to the desert, and the desert always collects. A sound cut through the night, a low, guttural growl, like an animal with its throat torn out. Cade's head snapped up. They're here. Elena's blood turned to ice. The clan? Worse. He grabbed her arm, dragging her back from the river's edge. The things that hunt for Elias. The things that wear his men like skins. The water at their feet churned, dark shapes moving beneath the surface. Elena's breath came in short, sharp gasps. What do we do? Cade's grip on her arm was bruising. We move! Now! They ran. The desert had always been vast, endless, but tonight it felt alive, the sand shifting beneath their boots like a living thing. The wind carried voices, whispers in a language Elena didn't know but somehow understood. The clan's curses, the desert's promises, her own name spoken in 100 different voices, each one pulling her in a different direction. Cade didn't slow. He moved like a man who'd done this before, his body low, his gun already in his hand. They'll track the oath, he shouted over the wind. The mark on your wrist. It's not just ink, it's a leash. Elena clutched the pouch, the tooth inside burning against her palm. How do I get it off? You don't. He skidded to a halt, shoving her behind a cluster of rocks. You break it. How? Cade's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw something raw in them. Fear. Regret. You die. Or you make them die first. The growling was closer now. The shadows between the rocks moved. Elena's fingers trembled as she pulled the tooth from the pouch. It was yellowed, jagged, humming with a power that made her teeth ache. What do I do with this? You bite back. Cade pressed his revolver into her free hand. Aim for the eyes, and don't stop shooting. The first of them crawled over the ridge. It had been a man once, maybe. Now it was just a shape, its limbs too long, its mouth stretched too wide, its skin split open to reveal something black and glistening beneath. Its eyes locked onto Elena, and it smiled. Mine, it hissed. Cade fired. The thing shrieked, its body jerking as the silver bullet tore through its shoulder. But it didn't fall. It laughed. You can't kill what's already dead, traitor. Elena's hand closed around the tooth. The desert's hum was a roar in her ears now, the scar on her wrist burning like fire. She remembered the old man's words. The desert remembers. She remembered the river answering her call. She remembered the way the ground had split open when she'd told Elias no. She looked at Cade, and she smiled. The thing lunged. Elena didn't think, she moved, driving the jagged tooth into the creature's outstretched wrist as Cade's bullet tore through its skull. Black ichor sprayed the sand, sizzling like acid where it landed. The creature shrieked, its body convulsing, its skin splitting further along the seams of its stolen flesh. For a heartbeat, its true form flickered beneath, something gaunt and skeletal, its mouth a void of needle teeth, its eyes hollow pits that drank the light. Then it collapsed, twitching, dissolving into the desert like ink in water. Cade didn't wait. He grabbed Elena's arm and yanked her deeper into the rocks, his breath ragged. That's one. There's more. She could feel them. The desert's whisper had become a chorus, 100 voices hissing her name, pulling at the scar on her wrist like a chain. The tooth in her hand pulsed with a sickly heat, as if it were alive. What are they? Hounds, Cade spat, reloading with practiced speed. Elias doesn't just hunt runners. He feeds them, to the desert, to the things that live in the cracks between the world and whatever's underneath. He jerked his chin toward the tooth. That's a piece of their master. A piece of the thing that made the oath. And now, you've got its attention. Elena's stomach twisted. The scar burned hotter. You knew this would happen. I knew it was a risk. His voice was grim. But you were already dead the second you ran. At least this way, you've got a chance. A howl split the night. Too many throats, too many tongues. The rocks trembled. Sand cascaded from above as something scraped against the stone. Something with too many limbs, too many eyes. Cade pressed his back to the rock beside her, his revolver gleaming dully. We're out of time. You feel that? She did. A pull, deep in her gut, like a hook buried in her bones. The desert wasn't just calling her name anymore. It was demanding. It wants me. It wants the oath. Cade's voice was low, urgent. The mark on your wrist. It's not just a brand. It's a door, and you're the key. Elena looked down at the scar. The skin around it was blackening, veins of darkness creeping up her arm like poison. What do I do? You break the door. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers biting into her flesh. But you've got to mean it. No hesitation, no fear. You hesitate and it'll drag you under so fast you won't even have time to scream. She swallowed hard. How? Blood. He pulled his knife from his belt and pressed it into her hand. Yours. Doesn't matter. But it's got to be willing. The scraping grew louder. The rocks groaned. Elena's pulse roared in her ears. You're saying I have to cut it? The mark? I'm saying you have to unmake it. His grip tightened. You carved the oath into your skin. Now you carve it out. The first of the hounds slithered over the ridge. Its body was a patchwork of stolen flesh, its limbs bending at wrong angles, its mouth a jagged slit filled with rows of needle teeth. It saw them, smiled. Little ghost, it rasped, its voice like nails on glass. We've been waiting. Cade fired. The hound twisted, the bullet tearing through its shoulder, but it didn't stop. It laughed, a wet, gurgling sound, and lunged. Elena drove the knife into her own wrist. The pain was white-hot, searing, but beneath it, something answered. The scar split open like rotten fruit, black blood welling up, thick and slow as tar. The hound's laughter cut off mid-scream as the desert itself seemed to lurch, the sand rising in a whirlwind, the air thick with the scent of ozone and burning flesh. Cade cursed, firing again and again as the hounds swarmed, their bodies dissolving into the storm, their voices rising in a chorus of fury. Keep going, he shouted over the wind. It's working. Elena gritted her teeth and dug deeper. The knife hit something hard beneath her skin, not bone, not sinew, but something smooth and cold like polished stone. She gasped, her vision swimming. The desert's whisper was a scream now, her name torn from 1,000 throats. The hounds were close, their breath hot on her neck, their claws scraping the rock. And then her fingers closed around it, a shard, black as midnight, humming with a power that made her teeth ache. She yanked. The world exploded. A shockwave of sand and wind blasted outward, throwing the hounds back like ragdolls. Their screams were swallowed by the storm as the desert roared, the ground splitting open in jagged veins of light. Elena staggered, the shard clutched in her bloodied hand, her wrist a raw, weeping wound. The mark was gone. The pull was gone. But the desert wasn't done. The sand at her feet moved, rising in a column, a face forming in the grit, a face with hollow eyes and a mouth that stretched too wide. "You cannot break the oath," it hissed, its voice the sound of 1,000 dying things. "You are mine." Elena met its gaze, and she smiled. Not anymore. She drove the shard into the heart of the whirlwind. The desert screamed. The desert's scream shattered the night. The sand column collapsed, the face dissolving into a storm of grit and ash. The wind howling like a wounded beast as the earth itself seemed to recoil. The hounds writhed, their stolen flesh unraveling, their screams tearing through the air as they were dragged backward. Into the desert, beneath it, swallowed by the same hunger that had once fed them. The ground trembled, cracks spiderwebbing outward from where Elena stood, her breath ragged, her hand still clenched around the black shard. And then, silence. The wind died. The sand settled. The desert held its breath. Elena's legs gave out. She hit the ground hard, her vision swimming, her wrist a raw, throbbing wound. The shard in her palm was cold now, inert. The scar, the mark, was gone. But the desert's voice still echoed in her bones, a whisper now, not a scream. "You are free." Cade dropped to his knees beside her, his face streaked with blood and dust, his revolver empty in his hand. His eyes searched hers, wild, disbelieving. "You did it!" She didn't answer. She couldn't. The weight of what she'd just done pressed down on her like a tombstone. She had broken the oath. She had survived. But the desert didn't give gifts without cost. She could feel it, the shift in the air, the way the shadows moved differently now, the way the wind carried something new, something hers. Cade's hand closed over hers, his grip bruising. "Elena." She looked up. The desert stretched endlessly around them. But it wasn't the same. The stars burned brighter. The silence hummed. And in the distance, where the river met the horizon, something glinted. A rider, motionless, watching. Too far to see clearly, too still to be human. Cade saw it too. His body tensed. "We're not alone." Elena stood, her legs unsteady, the shard still clutched in her fist. The rider didn't move, didn't speak, but she could feel his gaze, heavy as a promise. He's been there this whole time. Or he just got here. Cade's voice was low, dangerous. "Either way, we're not sticking around to find out." He reached for her, but Elena didn't take his hand. She was still listening, to the desert, to the wind, to the thing inside her that had woken when she broke the oath. It wasn't just freedom she'd won. It was something older, something hungrier. The rider turned his horse and vanished into the dark. Cade cursed. "We need to move, now." Elena didn't answer. She was looking at her wrist, the place where the scar had been. The skin was smooth, unmarked, but beneath it, she could feel something. A pulse, a heartbeat that wasn't hers. The desert had given her a choice once, blood or coin. Your choice, girl. She had chosen blood. And now, the desert wanted its due. Cade grabbed her arm, his voice urgent. "Elena, we have to go." She looked at him, really looked at him. For the first time. The man who had taught her to shoot. The man who had left her. The man who had come back. You knew. You knew what I was, softly. What I could do. His jaw tightened. I suspected. And you didn't tell me. Would you have believed me? His grip didn't loosen. Would you have stopped? She didn't have an answer for that. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of rain and something older, something that smelled like gunpowder and burnt sugar. The desert's voice was a murmur now, a lullaby. You are mine, it whispered, and I am yours. Elena closed her eyes. When she opened them again, she was smiling. Cade saw it. His face paled. What did you do? She turned toward the horizon, where the rider had disappeared, where the desert waited. I won. The first drop of rain hit the sand between them, then another, and another. The desert hadn't seen rain in 100 years. Cade's breath hitched. Elena. She looked at him one last time. Go back to the ghost town, Cade. Tell them the ghost is dead. She pressed the shard into his hand, curling his fingers around it. Tell them the desert took me. And what do I tell you? His voice was raw. She smiled, wide and wild, and stepped into the storm. The rain fell harder now, hissing against the sand, the drops turning to steam where they touched the ground. The desert was changing. She was changing. She could feel it. The power humming in her veins, the wind answering her call, the shadows bending to her will. Cade didn't follow. She didn't look back. The rider was waiting where the desert met the sky, his horse as black as the space between stars. He didn't speak as she approached. He didn't need to. She knew why he was here, knew what he wanted, knew what she wanted. Elena swung onto the horse behind him, her arms sliding around his waist. His coat was cold beneath her fingers, his body unnaturally still. You've been waiting for me, she murmured against the wind. Always, he answered, his voice the sound of distant thunder. The horse moved, and the desert opened. The rain fell in sheets now, the sand turning to mud beneath the deluge, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and something electric. The horizon split, just for a heartbeat. A jagged line of light where the sky shouldn't have been, and then they were through it. The world twisting around them, the desert's voice rising in a crescendo of welcome. Mine, it sang. Yours, she answered. And then there was only the ride, the storm, and the beginning of something that had been waiting for her since the night she first bled into the sand. If you felt the desert's hunger, if you heard its whisper in your name, then you know. This is only the beginning. Hit like and subscribe to Saddle and Secrets. Because the next story, it's coming. And it's hungrier than you think. The rider's waiting. The desert's calling. And she's not the only one who's going to answer.